Good afternoon to our viewers in Europe and good morning to our viewers in the United States. My name is Steve Sokol and I'm the president of the American Council on Germany. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. On October 15th and 16th in Berlin, the American Council on Germany and the Global Coalition on Aging will partner to hold the 2024 Silver Economy Forum, which will take place under the heading Leading the Future in an Aging World. As societies get older, there are opportunities and challenges as the number of older people as a proportion of the overall society grows. Longevity is changing how we live and how we work. And this phenomenon is known as the silver economy, and it's a huge market for companies, but it's also an area where public policy is evolving. In the months leading up to the Silver Economy Forum in Berlin, the American Council on Germany and the Global Coalition on Aging have decided to organize a series of virtual discussions on key issues to help set the stage for the event in October. And on behalf of the ACG and the Global Coalition on Aging, it's my great pleasure to be able to kick off the series today with an event focused on demographic megatrends, and also by unpacking some of the challenges, but also the opportunities that these trends present. So let me start by briefly setting the stage. The global population passed the milestone of 8 billion people in November of 2022, with the jump from 7 to 8 billion taking only 12 years. And although this number and the rapidly growing global population is important, one of the demographic challenges that does not seem to get enough attention is the fact of the aging of society. Globally, many societies are aging at rapid and even transformational rates as the number of older people grows faster than the number of young people. According to one statistic I recently heard, the number of people over the age of 65 is already greater than the number of people under the age of 65. So aging societies is a real issue, and one that we probably don't spend enough time talking about. I can hardly think of two better experts to have with us today to discuss this fundamental shift in demographics, or the challenges it poses, but also the opportunities it presents, than the two guests that we have today. And so I'm delighted to welcome Professor Dr. Andrea Maier and Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt. Nick Eberstadt is the Henry Wendt Chair in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute. Nick, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Andrea Maier serves as Professor of Medicine at the National University in Singapore. And we are incredibly lucky that she happens to be in Europe at the moment, because it makes the time difference a little bit easier to manage. Andrea, herzlich willkommen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Vielen Dank.
So, Nick, let's start with you. You've been thinking about and following demographic shifts for quite some time. Global population numbers are increasing, but I'd like to ask you maybe to put this into context for us. And so I'd like to start by kind of a shorter framing question. What are demographic trends, and why are they important for understanding global population dynamics overall?
Well, the big changes in birth trends and death trends slowly but quite unforgivingly change the realm of the possible for everything. There's a lot of leeway. We have human agency. Human beings are adept at adapting. We're the most adaptable of all of the species. But within the framework that population change imposes upon us, we have limits in our options. The big changes that we have seen over the last century are continuing now. Some of the trends that we're going to see over the next generation have already been baked into the cake by birth trends and health trends that are going to be unfolding. So we have a surprisingly confident aperture on how the world is going to unfold demographically over the next couple of decades, maybe out to the year 2050. The two huge trends, of course, are the ongoing explosion in health. Back in 1900, world life expectancy was about 30 years. Try to imagine that. Today, global life expectancy is maybe about 73 years. It's probably higher than many people appreciate, given the health benefits that low-income countries have had. And there seems to be no stop to this trend. For the last 180 years, the highest life expectancy country in the world has changed over time, but the slope has been an improvement of about 3 months for every year, and that hasn't stopped yet. The second trend is what seems to be a relentless march towards below replacement fertility. And if we actually had final data for the year 2023, which we won't have for a while, given the weakness in stat numbers in different places, it's quite possible that the world as a whole has passed the milestone of below replacement fertility, because every continent but the sub-Sahara, where birth rates are still very high, is now below replacement. And as we know, over time, if we do not have compensating immigration, below replacement fertility means that populations will not maintain stability. So we are heading towards a world of depopulating pressures, and also a world where we're going to have increasing aging. But it's going to be aging in a context of improvement in health.
So let's pick up with that and talk a little bit more about some of the implications of the population growth in some places, but depopulation pressures in other, and the aging. You started to sort of anticipate where I wanted to go next by talking about some of the differences in some of the regions, but very often we get caught up talking about global trends, but not necessarily regional trends. And there are different things happening in different parts of the world. Can you parse that for us a little bit?
Sure. We can spin the globe quickly. The parts of the world that are already in depopulation, that have already entered into depopulation, are the region of East Asia, not just China, but other countries, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the continent of Europe as a whole, if you include Russia, although not all countries within Europe obviously are depopulating yet. What we have to bear in mind is that low birth rates are the main driver of population aging, of graying. Small families make for gray societies, not long lives. It's great to have the long lives there, but it's the small families that are driving the extraordinary aging that we're going to see in some of the depopulating societies. It's hard to think of this yet, but East Asia is on a track where 1 out of 10 people in 2050 may be 80 years or older. So world that we haven't begun to really contemplate as seriously as we should. In North America, we've got a below replacement fertility, but due to the immigration flows so far, the North American countries, USA and Canada, still seem to be growing. Their labor forces are still growing. Their population aging is continuing, but it's at a more moderate pace. The surprises, I think, are in places like India and Latin America, which are also below replacement areas at this point. Bangladesh is below replacement area at this point, and they're on a path because of that to head towards pronounced population aging in the decades ahead. India, I think, is a particular concern because the level of skills and education for the general population is weaker than it should be. Something like almost 90% of the young people in India who are tested do not meet international basic skills. And a gray society without basic skills is going to have some challenges. And then the last, of course, is sub-Saharan Africa, where births are about 100% above the replacement line at this point. We're going to see very rapid population growth there over the next generation. An increasing share of the world's labor force growth is going to be from youthful sub-Saharan Africa. Basic skills are going to be the name of the game, and we still have a big lag there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you've obviously covered a lot of points that I hope we'll get into in the course of our conversation. I mean, part of it is, where does the workforce of tomorrow come from, and how do we make sure that they have the skills that they need? You know, in very neutral terms, in a sense, you've described these trends, which one has to say are in and of themselves neither good or bad, but they do have a tendency to create anxiety because things are changing, things are going to be different. And I guess it really comes down to how one sort of responds to these trends, and certainly in the countries that we're focused on today, to the graying of society. And so I'd like to bring Andrea into the conversation because this trend of global aging reflects some positives, like significant advances in medicine and in social and economic structures over diseases and illness, but they also present societal changes. And so I'd be curious in very broad brushstrokes to hear from you how some of these aging societies are responding, how they're impacted in terms of their economies and medical healthcare and social systems.
Yeah, this is a huge question to answer. So first of all, there is a shift in how many young and old people we have, but very importantly is not only to looking what the lifespan is, but especially the health span. So how do we age? And we're aging quite differently compared to decades ago. Just for a little bit of clarification, the health span is the years somebody has on Earth with reasonable health, where somebody has, in some definitions, no age-related diseases. Think about cardiovascular disease, think about dementia. There is not having these diseases, also being able to care for themselves, which is, I think, what we want. We want a long health span, and we want also quite a long lifespan. At least many of us want it. So the lifespan is the age as at death. Very importantly is that the health span and the lifespan, if you're looking at different countries around the globe, the gap is in industrialized countries is roughly 30 years. So when do we have our first age-related diseases? That's at the age of 50, 55. How long do individuals live? That's 80, 85 years, which means there is a gap. So on the one hand side, it's about the number of individuals at a certain age, which gives, I would say, a manpower problem, labor problem, who is caring for who is actually making sure that all the industries we have, that they can function. On the other hand side, there is a different agenda of lots of countries, is how productive are the individuals at work. And the health of individuals is absolutely influencing the productivity of the labor. So if you're coming back to your question, what do countries do? It depends on the lifespan, it depends on the health span, and it also depends, of course, at the trajectory. And we just mentioned fertility rates. So how many children are going to be born? So how is the projection of these countries? And what kind of political agenda, for example, with immigration, does certain countries have? And this really influences the necessities of some people to either invest, for example, as in Singapore, in higher fertility rates, making it more attractive, like also in Japan, or investing much, much more in middle-aged individuals to become more healthier, to be in labor, to be productive much, much longer. And other countries still invest heavily also, and we have to invest in nursing homes, etc. How do we care for individuals at the later stage in life?
So that goes at least part of the way to sort of answering this question of how one closes this gap between the health span and the lifespan, right? I mean, I think that's at the core of what you're talking about. And 30 years is a pretty big gap, given what you had said about the first age-related illnesses appearing, 50, 55, and then the number of the longevity of many people well into their 80s at this point. And it's sort of a micro and a macro question, right? How does one close the gap for an individual? But then how does one do it on the kind of massive scale that we're talking about when we look at the numbers?
Yeah, I think we have to go one step back, looking why are we so long living? Because our lifespan is increasing so heavily. And of course, it is because of industrialization, we have hygiene measures, etc. But I would really love to bring medical knowledge into this arena. We are living longer because we have beautiful hospitals, we have a beautiful healthcare system. That we have due to the healthcare system, due to the research, basic research, but also applied research. We now have medication we didn't have 50 years ago or 80 years ago. If you're looking at medical books, they really changed. They had to be rewritten. We now are solving things we couldn't solve 20 or 30 years ago. So what we are looking at is, I would say, the success of modern history of medical services. Sometimes if I'm being challenged, I say it's really hard to die because we have so many opportunities. We have an accumulation of many diseases, the age-related diseases. If you're looking at 60-year-old, 60% of a 60-year-old population has at least 2 or more chronic diseases and takes 5 or more medications. At the age of 80, this is 80%. So there's a huge amount of individuals, if we would not have medication like an insulin or other injection vaccination, that the population would really look very, very differently. And I would say we don't have to deal with it. I think it's a success. Now we know that we can modify our body, that we are living longer due to this revolution. The medical field now thinks, okay, maybe we cannot even, or not only try to cure age-related diseases, but we can prevent it. Mm-hmm. And here, primary prevention, but also secondary prevention comes in. And in the past 2 decades, there is an entire new revolution. Many of us already know that we understand why we age. Why do I have wrinkles? Why is the body composition changing during lifetime? Why do I lose strengths? Why do I lose also very often the mental capacity in terms of cognition? Very, very often 30% of a population being 70 to 80 years old have dementia, which is a huge threat to individuals, but also to society. So how do we deal with it? And there really a new area of modern medicine kicks now in, which is healthy longevity medicine, understanding why we age, trying to find solution how to maintain the function of the body to antagonize the aging process, and therewith reducing the risk of age-related diseases. And this is just the medical, the biological part, and we even haven't touched on how do we deal with a longer life in terms of our feeling of our mental capacity, about what we think about our quality of life, which is, I think, even a different story. Hopefully we can touch on.
Mm-hmm. So I'd definitely like to come back to that in just a minute. But interestingly, I came from an event this morning at the Council on Foreign Relations here in New York on the foreign policy implications of aging. And there were a number of interesting points that came up, but there were two that I'd like to bring in here. One was that ageism is pervasive. And the other was that a new narrative needs to be written to make people a little bit more aware, both of the trends that Nick is talking about, but also the kinds of developments that you're talking about, Andrea. And so I'd like to fold in a question that one of our viewers has asked, which is, how does one raise awareness about the demographic megatrend of aging that we're seeing? On the one hand, and I guess that question is sort of more directed to you, Nick, And the other, which is directed to you, Andrea, is how does one change the narrative about focusing on some of the kinds of issues, some of the kinds of preventive measures that you're talking about for people to become more aware of? And I think that's true both on an individual basis, but also from a policy standpoint. Nick, why don't you start first with the overarching trend?
I, I'd suggest that this is a matter of leadership in both the public and the private spheres. And the advantage that serious leaders have in business and in government is that these trends are not exactly secret. We've got a very good idea of what the demographic profile of the industrialized societies will look like 10 years from now, 15 years from now, even 20 years from now. Once you start to get into trying to guess how many babies people are going to have, you get a little bit off track. But we've got a very good sense of where we're going. That's why you need public servants who can explain and convince and begin the dialogue with voters about where we're going, the sorts of pressures we're going to be facing, also the sorts of opportunities that we're going to have, as Andrea was saying. But there's a huge role for the private sector here, because businesses can be much more flexible. They can have much more leeway in taking leadership and in providing real world examples that others can see and learn from. So if we do nothing, we're going to be like picnickers down at low tide, and we kind of don't want to do that. We can get ahead of the curve, but it's not going to happen spontaneously.
But Nick, let me sort of follow up on that a little bit. It seems like issues like climate change have that kind of awareness. There's more of a discussion about climate change. We'll definitely get into, I think, a conversation about technology and the use of technology in aging societies, but there's a huge debate about things like artificial intelligence at the moment as well. There doesn't seem to be the same kind of conversation about aging and things that we can be doing now. Do you have hope that those political leaders will put this higher on the global agenda?
Yes, I do have hope. And the reason I have hope is because it's not a hopeless situation. It's because there are so many options. There are so many tools that public policy can grasp for, that we can rely upon in a flexible private market system, in the sorts of changes in business procedures that can come about, in labor market flexibility, in public policies. I mean, one of the obvious questions is going to be how we address the old pay-as-you-go system of public finance. It's great when you've got an actual population pyramid. It's not so good when the population pyramid's been turned upside down. But these are not things that are going to be surprises unless we want them to be surprises. And for them to be surprises, we have to close our eyes.
And as a teaser to the next session that we'll be having at the end of this month, we will be looking at the financing of our healthcare systems as well. So that's obviously something that's on our agenda. Andrea, I'd like to bring you in here and get your sense of sort of awareness about the kinds of issues that you're talking about things that one can undertake, right? I mean, you explained very clearly why we're living so long, that this is a huge success. We have learned a lot, and that there are lots of different places where countries and individuals are investing, whether it's fertility rates, whether it's trying to make sure that middle-aged people are taking better care of themselves so that they can live longer, and of course, investment in older people. But do you see political leadership on these topics as well?
I think there could be more is my political answer. There is absolutely, it's on the agenda. We are living at the moment in the United Nations Decade for Healthy Aging, and I think that's a huge success. After lots of debate, if that should be a topic for the United Nations and the WHO, and I think positively, yes, they made the decision. We're already living in the decade now for 3 years. There is an agenda to really increase the awareness and there with hopefully knowledge of all countries around the world. What is at the moment a little bit hampering the success, I would say, is that we do not have many measures to see what healthy aging is. We know how long people live, but what their quality of life is, what they can do in daily activities, if they can rise from a chair, for example, if they can feed themselves. And in middle-aged individuals, it's not feeding, it's not walking, because the majority of individuals can do it, but how productive are individuals? And that has to be taken into account. And even earlier, if we are talking about the aging process, which starts very early in life, even many think during conception or even pre-conception, it's very important to also take children's health into account. Think about obesity in younger ages. So yes, we are living in a decade of awareness. We are living in a decade where aligned countries will have to measure their healthy aging status, which is, I think, very important. I think more crucial per country, if we are zooming in, countries have to make a decision how much of their GDP to spend for health. There is already a disparity. There are some countries spending 5 or 6%, some like the US 15%. There is a huge difference, but it's rising all the time during in the last decades. So where is actually the limit where we want to spend our money on? And it's not only that we are talking about health insurers where people want to spend the money on, but whose responsibility is it to stay healthy? And that's even a broader topic. And it's, I would say, a shared responsibility, but here, none of the countries has a good plan, or even not a plan how to discuss it with the different parties, with the ecosystem being involved in primary prevention. And this is what we are talking about. A last point I would like to make is that what I see is this huge increase of consumers who understand that they are aging on individual level, who are trying to find solutions for themselves, which led to a huge increase of industry partners in the ecosystem. Think about wearable devices to check how healthy you are, your heart rate variability, your sleep. Think about startups who are finding and searching for new drugs to somebody who wants to live longer. Think about even industries who want to match individuals in terms of dating. A third generation dating app now exists. So there is a huge amount of industry partners who are entering now the health and the wellness arena because of the search of individuals to live longer and very often also to live healthier. And I think that's an opportunity, and we just have to build an ecosystem with good structures in the different countries to nurture that.
Let me pick up on a couple of themes here. I know that one of the sort of important talking points from the Global Coalition on Aging is that there's a $17 trillion global silver economy, which is a huge number. And that ties in with what you're talking about, Andrea, of people who are part of this silver economy who are thinking about devices, technology, shoes, so that they can get around more easily. Do you believe that every business already has a aging strategy, or should they? Would they be well advised to have that?
I think every company should actually think about who is my consumer, of course, and how does the consumer look like in the next 10 years? And during the next 10 years, this consumer, if you want to keep the consumers, will have different challenges based on their aging trajectory. And we can predict now how people age. That's very easy. So we can predict how many of the 10,000 consumers somebody has, what the proportion actually will have, what kind of difficulties. So it's predictable. So, but it's not only the silver economy which is growing so much, but there is now also a shift of many more younger individuals who are at the pre-stage of the silver economy part, who want to optimize their health, to be healthier for longer, because they think and they feel, I want to increase my productivity, I want to feel better. What should I do? What do I do? And their business partners come in, and sometimes in a very productive way, but also in a counterintuitive way, and maybe even decreasing the quality of the products because it's a non-regulated field yet. Huge opportunities.
Well, speaking of opportunities, one of our viewers just said that products like Google Nest seem to be targeted to the safety of our homes, but not necessarily as a tool for monitoring our grandparents, and sort of asks whether Google isn't missing an important opportunity. And I'm sure that there are other companies out there in a similar situation.
Absolutely. And especially the intergenerational aspect. If you have a product, how do you make it and how to tweak it to make it even better for certain populations. And we are just talking about age, but I may want to say there are so many differences also in terms of culture, ethnicity, how people age, that products have to be adapted. And not that alone, that we also have to separate in some of the topics also females from males. So half of the population is very often, in terms of the products being produced, not comparable to the other half, because of the different features based on our chromosomes we have, which are very different between males and females.
Yeah, indeed. Nick, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think Andrea's spot on. There's still enormous opportunities that are untapped here, and it indicates a certain lack of imagination, but that's where entrepreneurship comes in and filling these gaps. And I think there are great opportunities in the future.
I'd like to pick up on something else that Andrea raised, and both of you, or she's talked a little bit about prevention and trying to maintain one's health, and also talked about investing in young people. Obviously, Nick, you're watching, birth rates as well as death rates, and I had wanted to ask a little bit later about sort of flipping it, not just talking about the older demographic in our society, but don't we need to be investing more in children and youth if we want a healthy aging society already now? I'm thinking about things like obesity rates, but also just undernourishment rates in parts of the world as well. Today's young people will become old, but they will probably also become very old, and how they age is going to be impacted by their health today. Where do you both see sort of this investment in children and in youth as helping us have a more resilient aging society?
If we're going to have aging and shrinking societies, we need to be alert to human resources and human potential at every step of the life cycle. So, of course, healthy aging, but as Andrea said, you want to start looking at that from very early on. And so the different sorts of opportunities and investments depend upon the age of persons. So from babies through childhood, through youth and adolescence, to early working age, and then on to middle age, and then beyond. So very generally speaking, human resources are going to be augmented by better nutrition, better health, involves a lot of prevention, better education and skills, and also we've talked a little bit about this, but the critical role of research and development in expanding the horizons, both in life sciences and outside them, because a lot of other sorts of technical changes are going to make it possible to do more with less. And the name of the game in the future is going to be doing more with less.
Andrea, any thoughts on sort of this investment in children and youth?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but first of all, we should invest in all our in our decades we are on Earth. But I think from a perspective of an aging society, we did not yet so much look at children, even the newborns, or even in utero, what kind of consequences a bad start could have for future events. Think about 5 decades later. We now know that, for example, if a mother was malnourished and being pregnant, and that happened in the second or in the third trimester, that these children 5 decades later, at the age of 50, 55, have huge metabolic problems.
Yep.
So it's really determining the start of life, how much healthcare costs we are going to have, and how people very likely are also going to feel. So I think really, if you're talking about aging, it's already in the term. It's not age, but it's aging, and aging is a trajectory. And this is also a new trend that we are not just looking, we are not a snapshot. A colleague of mine learned me this very nice analogy. No, we are a story. We are not a snapshot. So we should look at our health during the trajectory. I will give you one example. If a newborn is born, we are tracking these children until the age of 6 or 15, depends on the countries. And then we are stopping with it. We are stopping to track their health. We are stopping to track their development and their growth. And now there is a trend that we are looking at health during the lifespan, and really looking at the BMI, the weight, for example. It's a huge problem. We are looking at cardiovascular factors to really see how can we manipulate at certain ages individuals to nudge them into ways to have a better lifestyle, for example, on individual level. How do we do that on societal level? And there, for example, how we design cities kick in. What do we want on group level and individual level to be able to avoid the risk of outcomes we do not want to have, taking into account that people need to make their own decision what they want with their life, if well educated, and making choices, and hopefully then therewith having a good quality of life.
So I'd like to maybe come back to sort of the contributions that people can make as they get older, and that's something that you've both sort of touched on a little bit. This is maybe a little bit of an oversimplification, but it seems as if the sort of model in the 20th century was there were 3 phases to life. You grew up and got an education, you worked, and then you retired, right? 3 phases. Retirement phase was probably the shortest because you retired at 60, 65, something like that. And as life expectancy has increased to 73 globally, as Nick was saying, into the 80s, as Andrea was saying, has this sort of model evolved in the 21st century, or do we just see an extension of that sort of phase of work with different chapters and different contributions? Maybe when you turn 65, you're not working a 5-day-a-week schedule, but you're working 3 days a week and spending 2 days taking care of your grandchildren or something like that. Do either of you see sort of a change in the model which can help people sort of understand and internalize a little bit better some of the overarching issues that we're talking about?
I think we've been overtaken by events, and I think our models are kind of being pressured and kind of like we're being dragged along into reality because we're not ahead of this curve. I mean, until relatively recently, we had this obvious paradox of longer lifespans coinciding with lower and lower average ages at retirement. Now, you don't have to be a demographer to know where that goes. You don't have to be an actuary or an economist to know where that goes. We're seeing a bit of a turnaround in that, but there's still lots of policy disincentives for people who are older to stay economically active. I mean, you may not want to push people to work. You want to have the voluntary principle that Andrea referred to, but you certainly don't want to discriminate against them. There's a huge, huge economic opportunity for aging societies in unlocking the value of healthy aging. And the notion that people might choose to be working in their 60s or in their 70s is something that policies and businesses and workforces ought to be thinking about and preparing to adapt for.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I would like to add on that, I don't think that the framework really changed yet. I think it's really ageism we are facing. Very often, if you have a 70-year-old saying, okay, I go to work, then somebody else says this person still goes to work. And that already in the terminology, in the word still, it says, or somebody can still drive a car, somebody still has whatever. So I don't think that this is happening. And again, here, the consumer is key, because now we have a third generation university. We have a third generation dating apps. We have third generation of vacation planners, etc. So it is the consumer who is driving the change because of the demographic changes, and maybe also because of the slower cycles of politics making the rules of building the frameworks. And I think showcasing in some of the European countries, including France, how difficult it is also to change policies when you are talking about retirement age. But making it voluntary to work, I think, is very important, because otherwise it will be ageism in the end.
So this ties in with a question and comment that one of our viewers made. They write that there seems to be a rise in ageism at work, and it almost appears as if that is a punishment for staying healthy and remaining cognitive later in life, and that it almost seems as if younger work colleagues are connecting age with death and not necessarily with their contribution. And this has to have an impact on the fair treatment of older workers. And so the question from the viewers is, what do the two of you think about that?
I would say that there are some basic economic misconceptions that most people have, and it's maybe not surprising, but they're misconceptions. And one of these is referred to when you learn economics as the lump of labor fallacy. It's as if the good Lord went around the different continents, sprinkling a certain limited number of work hours on North America and Europe and Asia. And if the greedy old 70-year-olds are at work taking up these hours, that means that people in their 20s aren't going to get the chance to work, taking jobs. I mean, the essence of a market economy is that you create more things through demand. That the labor creates more demand, which creates more demand for work. And it's not a zero-sum game. And understanding that the contributions of older people enrich society as a whole is maybe not intuitive to everybody, but it's a fact of life.
And I think it's necessary because we are spending so much money on healthcare costs at the moment to stay healthy. So there should also be incentives. The London Business School did lots of calculations, really seeing, okay, if we would live longer and healthier, what would that mean for the economy? And it's not only to reduce the healthcare costs, but it's because you also have to invest something to maintain health. But especially also productivity, which is important. And that under the umbrella of lowering fertility rates around the world. So it's an absolute necessity to talk about when people should stop working. And another factor many do not know is people who are entering the retirement age, 1/3, is at greatest risk of developing age-related diseases because the entire cycle of the day is disturbed, very often inducing low physical activity, bad eating habits, bad sleep, etc. So retirement age and having that clear-cut number is actually a risk for the health of the individuals.
I could continue for much longer, but looking at the clock, I'm seeing that we're rapidly running out of time, and I wanted to sort of use at least part of our time together to look forward and to talk a little bit about the kinds of strategies that governments, but also that the private sector can implement to promote a healthy aging society, but also to support older members of our society as well. And I'm curious if either of you have any thoughts on that. We've talked about a couple of things so far, but let's spend the last 10 minutes or so really trying to unpack what governments and the private sector can do.
Let's start. I mean, I am cautiously optimistic about the prospect, because in a world that is increasing with health, increasing its education, increasing technological possibilities, I can see the path where we not only maintain but increase prosperity in a shrinking, aging world. It doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen spontaneously necessarily. We need to have foresight and considerable deliberation on many, many different areas. I want to point out two problems that even someone who is cautiously optimistic can see as serious questions that policymakers and people in the business community and informed citizens ought to be thinking more about. One of these is the question of senescence. I mean, I'm quite optimistic about the prospects for healthy economic activity for people in their 60s and 70s. When one gets into 80s, things tend to get a little bit more complicated. In particular, the question of dementia. I expect that eventually we will be able to have a medicalized answer to the challenge of Alzheimer's and dementia. We can note that over the last 2 generations, we haven't made much progress in this area, unlike practically all the rest of the life sciences. The second point that I would put on the table is the whole question of the revolution within the family. It is declining fertility and sub-replacement fertility that is mostly driving the graying. It's trends in health that's making it for healthy aging, but it's driving the graying. And that means that family is going to be increasingly scarce on the ground for older people. Japan is kind of at the point on the spear here. Some of the demographic projections for Japan suggest that a woman born in 1990 has slightly more than 50% chance of completing life without any biological grandchildren. Up until now, family has been the indispensable unit for elder care and elder support. And that is going to be changing in different places in a sort of a disparate way within society. There's going to be a lot of heterogeneity there. And thinking about what the substitutes and responses are is going to be, I think, a big, important challenge for the future.
Andrea, anything to add?
I really like the idea of the family structure a little bit from a different viewpoint, because we need social structures. And we already know that mental health is declining around the world. 20% of individuals, independent of their age, have depressive symptoms. And we hear varying numbers of people who feel burned out, etc. So we really have to see the embedding of the human being. And in the end, very often, this is the family structure. And I think we have to adapt. And where do we actually age? We are aging in an environment which is built based on structures, and very often architecture is involved. I think if I would be asked to advise governments, I think architecture is a very, very important point. How do we design where we live? Because our environment is not only hugely influencing our health, our physical health, but especially also our mental health, and how easy it is to reach others. And there was our friends and our family. The second thing I would like to mention is incentivizing behavior of individuals, which could be led by governments. And that is partly based on the structure of cities. Where do you have bus stops, etc.? How far do you have to walk? What kind of solutions do you give to have a healthy lifespan? But another, next to physical activity, is food. How do you actually work with big multinationals together to have healthy food on the table? How do we avoid the hamburger every day? And how do we get the fruit and the vegetables on the plate? Because we already know that if we would shift people on group level from a normal diet towards a healthy diet, that individuals would live 8 to 10 years longer and healthier. So there's a huge, in an area of a low fertility rate, there's a huge opportunity to tackle a problem if people are incentivized to do certain things.
So let me sort of follow up on those 2 points and ask you, I think, a very important question of how do we get more parties involved in this? I think very often the issue of aging focuses on health and is sort of the mandate or remit of health ministries, and not so much ministries of economic affairs or finance, or even, in a European context, sort of ministries that are engaged in these kinds of structural change and where you put the bus stop, how you build cities. How do we make sure that we get these other actors involved in this discussion about aging and about having older societies? It's not just about prevention from the standpoint of an individual's healthcare. It's about trying to anticipate these trends, which we know, and acting accordingly.
Yeah, health is just an outcome of policies. It's not the determinant. It's not the reason why somebody is healthy or not, or more healthy or not. I will just give you an example from Singapore, where I live, and partly I left Australia at a certain point in my life to choose to live in Singapore, because the Ministry of Manpower, the Ministry of Health and of Education, which is very important, and transportation are working together. So it really starts with the awareness. What do you want to tackle, and how broad do you want the approach to tackle a certain issue? And the issue in many Asian countries, as alluded to, is the low fertility rate, and it's a huge healthcare cost, and there is an economic threat which should be tackled with the collaboration of many ministries.
Nick, any thoughts on how to bring others into this field as well and make them understand how important it is?
Some countries are going to do this better than other countries, because some countries have more social glue, more social cohesion, more social trust. Less social trust and less confidence in civic institutions and government is obviously a negative in trying to deal with any sort of challenge that demands resilience. Where we can come in is trying to help bring information to people who are receptive to it. And like anything else in life, it's like gardening. It may start out with very small increments, but it may bear big returns later on if one is kind of persistent with it.
So we heard from Andrea about what's happening in Singapore, but I guess one sort of closing question to each of you of are there other countries, societies, governments that are getting it right that can serve as a model for us to look at more closely?
For me, it's too early to say that any of the countries is getting it right because we are in a very early stage. If you're looking at history, we have this shift. We know since 10, 15 years how lifestyle, how certain threats could influence the health of humans. We are at the beginning of understanding. I would like to have an approach as we have in COVID, that we are observing what different countries are doing. And then in the end, after 3 to 5 years, after capturing data, what we are going to do in the United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging, to actually see what works and what doesn't work in an observational manner. I think measuring, knowing what kind of policies countries introduce when, and then measuring again, I think is a way forward to learn from different approaches.
I'd say look at what governments are doing with regard to labor markets, with regard to public finance and discipline of public finance, with regard to research and development. The governments that are good on those things are probably also going to be good on the questions of healthy aging as well.
Well, let me just close with a note that we received from one of our viewers that's pretty positive, I think. The viewer writes that they are a first-year baby boomer and found their calling by volunteering in 3 hospitals over the last 25 years. And this person always tells new volunteers that without the help of the volunteers, it would actually be hospital employees who are doing the work that they're doing, and that this work is greatly appreciated. So I think that just underscores what we're talking about, that one can have a second life, that one can have a second or third or fourth act as a professional and make an important contribution. But right now, I'd really like to thank the two of you, Andrea and Nick, for this excellent start to the series of webinars that we're organizing in the run-up to the Silver Economy Forum in mid-October in Berlin. I can't think of a better way to start. This has been great, and I wish we had had more time because there were so many issues that we could have or should have spent more time on. I'd also like to thank our viewers also for weighing in with some excellent questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but you will have other opportunities. And so I want to let everybody know that you can join us again on May 28th at 11 a.m. on the East Coast, or 5 p.m. 17 Uhr in Central Europe, for our second webinar in the series, which will focus on sustainable financing of healthcare systems in aging societies. And we have more events slated for June and September, so stay tuned. But for now, from the Global Coalition on Aging and the American Council on Germany, a huge thanks to Andrea Maier and Nick Eberstadt for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.